The Xylosian Institute for Historical Reconstruction was, to put it mildly, a very quiet place. It was a place where thoughts were considered louder than voices, where the soft chime of a crystalline xylosion was the equivalent of a shout, and where dust motes were viewed as unruly hooligans. The air itself, scrubbed and recycled to within a single molecule of absolute purity, hummed with the silent, overwhelming weight of academic superiority. It was a space carved from polished obsidian and glowing crystal, a grand, sterile cathedral dedicated to the galaxy's dead. And in the center of its main reconstruction hall, a collection of the galaxy's most brilliant minds were staring at a pile of metal with the collective disappointment of a parent whose child has just declared their intention to become a professional mime. Presiding over the failure was Grand Proctor Valen. Valen was a Xylosian, which meant he was a 7-foot-tall, impossibly slender being of living, semi-sentient crystal. His thoughts manifested as soft pulses of internal light and were translated into condescendingly formal galactic standard by a small silver orb that hovered near where a shoulder might be on a less sophisticated life form. Right now, his inner light was a frantic, strobing pattern of irritated magenta. The orb translated this as a sigh of pure, distilled impatience. "It is, once again, a failure," the orb stated, its voice a perfectly modulated baritone that managed to sound both bored and judgmental. "The tensile strength is inadequate, the molecular bonding is unstable, and the overall mass exceeds the calculated viable limit by a factor of 12. It is, to use a primitive but effective term, junk." Beside him, Kthar the Grolak made a noise like rocks grinding together. Kthar was the Institute's specialist in primitive warfare, a title he held by virtue of being a walking example of it. He was a mountain of muscle and dark green chitin, with 4 powerful arms, the lower 2 of which were currently crossed over a chest broad enough to serve as a landing pad for a personal shuttle. His mandibles clicked in annoyance. It is an insult to the memory of the Forlag. They were warriors. This is a coffin. A heavy, brittle coffin, the Forlag hegemony. A name spoken in hushed, reverent tones across the academic circles of the galaxy. They had been dead for 10,000 years, a species that had blazed across their small corner of the cosmos in a firestorm of brutal, pre-energy weapon conquest before succumbing to a tailored virus. They were the galactic bogeyman, the ultimate example of primitive savagery perfected, and their armor was the stuff of legend. Schematics, recovered from a derelict scout ship, showed a masterpiece of layered, forged metal. It was supposed to be light enough for their bipedal forms, yet strong enough to turn aside the kinetic slugs and plasma bursts of their era. The Institute had been trying to recreate it for 3 standard years. They had the exact material composition, the precise atmospheric conditions of the Forlag homeworld, and computer models that could simulate the stress on every single rivet. And they had failed. Every time. Their suits were too heavy, too brittle, too clumsy. Their high-tech molecular forges, capable of printing starship hulls, seemed incapable of replicating the crude, savage elegance of the Forlag design. It was a profound and deeply embarrassing cosmic mystery, which led them, inevitably and regrettably, to him. The door to the reconstruction hall hissed open, admitting a creature that seemed fundamentally out of place, like a rubber chicken at a funeral. He was bipedal, but soft. No chitin, no scales, no energy fields. He was covered in a layer of dark blue woven fibers on his lower half and a gray, soft-looking sheath on his torso that bore the faded, cryptic glyphs AC/DC. He was of average height, average build, and had a face that was almost offensively unremarkable. His name was Jake, and he was a human. Humans were a known quantity in the galaxy, and that quantity was low. They were a joke species. Their homeworld, a place called Earth, was catalogued as a Class 7 garden world, which meant it was mostly harmless. Their biology was laughably fragile. They were susceptible to everything from temperature fluctuations to unfiltered water. They possessed no natural weapons, their senses were dull, and their lifespans were offensively short. They were seen as cosmic curiosities, a species so ill-equipped for survival that their continued existence was attributed to some kind of statistical fluke or, more likely, the intervention of a bored, higher-dimensional being with a strange sense of humor. They were sometimes hired for novelty positions, like this one. A primal technology consultant, Valen thought the title was absurd. You are the human, Valen's orb stated. It was not a question. Jake gave a small, polite smile. It was a gesture the galactic community had catalogued as bared teeth appeasement display. He ambled forward, his soft-soled foot coverings making no sound on the polished floor. That's me, Jake. I'm the consultant. He looked at the pile of mangled metal plates. So, this is the problem child, huh? Thar snorted, a sound like a hydraulic press hitting a gravel pile. Your species is familiar with failure. Perhaps you can offer insight into its nature. Jake's smile didn't waver. If anything, it became a little more genuine. Oh, absolutely. We're experts. We have entire philosophies built around it. We even give out awards for it, though we usually call them participation trophies. He crouched down, running a bare, soft-looking hand over one of the warped plates. The metal was a complex alloy of iron, carbon, and a few exotic heavy elements. Looks like you've got crystallization fractures here. And this warping, what temperature are you forging at? Valen's internal light pulsed a condescending shade of pale blue. The forging process is perfectly calibrated. We use a contained plasma field stabilized at precisely 4,2537 degrees Kelvin, the optimal temperature for molecular bonding of this specific alloy as dictated by our simulations. Jake tilted his head. Okay, so, way too hot. Then, he stood up, wiping a smudge of metallic dust on his fibrous leg coverings, an act that made Valen's orb flicker in disgust. You're not bonding it. You're cooking it. You're making it neat and tidy on a molecular level, but you're boiling out all the good stuff. All the tension, all the anger. A profound silence descended upon the hall. The concept of angry metal was not something covered in the Xylosian academic curriculum. Thar's upper arms, which had been resting at his sides, tensed. Metal does not have emotions, human, no, but it has stress, Jake corrected, his tone still mild and conversational. You're trying to build a warrior's armor with a scientist's tools. You're trying to make it perfect. Armor like this isn't supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be pissed off. You don't convince it to be strong. You beat it into submission. He looked around the vast, sterile lab with its shimmering force fields and silent, floating drones. This is all wrong. Where's your forge? Valen gestured a crystalline limb toward the contained plasma field. The forging apparatus is state-of-the-art. It provides a uniform and controllable environment. No, I mean a real forge, Jake interrupted. A fire. Something that burns. I need a hammer. A big, heavy, stupid piece of metal on a stick. I need an anvil. A block of something dense that doesn't mind being hit a lot. And a bucket of water. Preferably dirty. The assembled academics exchanged glances, their various methods of displaying confusion, flickering lights, twitching antennae, shifting color palettes, creating a silent cacophony of bewilderment. They had spent years and a budget that could fund a small warship to create the perfect, sterile, high-tech environment. And this primitive, this soft-bodied joke, was asking for rocks and fire. It was like asking a master chronologist for a sundial. But they were desperate. And, on some level, morbidly curious. So they provided what he asked for. An induction furnace was jury-rigged to create a raw, roaring magnetic fire. A solid block of neutronium alloy, usually used for calibrating ship sensors, was lowered to the floor to serve as an anvil. And a Grolac auxiliary, looking deeply confused, was dispatched to fetch a simple, heavy-headed percussion tool and a container of non-purified maintenance fluid. Jake stripped off his gray torso covering, revealing a thinner, white one underneath. The gesture was shockingly primal. His arms were not thick with muscle like Thar's, but they were corded and defined in a way that hinted at wiry, functional strength. He picked up the hammer, testing its weight with a few easy swings that were surprisingly fluid. Then he grabbed a raw ingot of the foreleg alloy with a pair of long tongs and plunged it into the heart of the induction fire. For the next several hours, the sterile silence of the Institute was shattered. It was replaced by the roar of the fire, the rhythmic, deafening clang of hammer on metal, and the violent hiss of hot steel quenching in water. Jake worked with a focused, brutal economy of motion. There was no scientific precision, only a kind of violent, intuitive dance. He would pull the glowing metal from the fire, beat it into shape with a storm of controlled blows, then thrust it into the water before repeating the process. He wasn't following a schematic. He seemed to be arguing with the metal, forcing it into a shape it didn't want to take. The academics watched, mesmerized and appalled. It was savage. It was chaotic. It was working. Slowly, a piece of armor took shape on the anvil. It was a breastplate, curved and angled in ways their simulations had deemed inefficient. It was not the gleaming, perfect artifact they had envisioned. The surface was rough, covered in the faint, overlapping marks of the hammer blows, creating a texture like hardened scales. The color was not a uniform silver but a swirling, mottled gray, darkened and blued in places from the quenching. It looked less like a piece of technology and more like the shell of some terrible, ancient beast. Finally, Jake set his hammer down. He lifted the breastplate, steam still rising from its surface, and set it on a display stand. He was breathing heavily, his skin glistening with a sheen of moisture the aliens identified as perspiration, a primitive and inefficient cooling method. Valen glided forward, his orbs circling the finished piece. His internal light was a confused lavender. The form is broadly correct, but the finish is appallingly crude. The surface is uneven. The coloration is inconsistent. It lacks the ceremonial polish depicted in the records. Jake looked up, wiping his forehead with the back of a grimy hand. He looked from Valen's shimmering form to the rough, brutal-looking breastplate. He seemed to genuinely consider the proctor's critique for a moment. Then he looked back at Valen, his expression utterly serious, his voice calm and even. "I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on the final specifications," he said. The task was recreate ancient armor polished for display, or decorated with blood for authenticity. The question hung in the purified air like a particle of plutonium. Decorated with blood. Valen's translator orb went silent. Its usual smooth baritone was gone, replaced by a faint, high-pitched whine, like a dying capacitor. The Grand Proctor's own crystalline body, which normally pulsed with calm, superior light, flickered violently, cycling through a rainbow of panicked colors like a cosmic garage sale of anxiety. The concept did not compute. It was data without a file, a word without a definition. Decoration was for art, for ceremony. It involved precious metals, intricate engravings, light weaving. Blood was a biological failure state, a messy, inefficient byproduct of physical trauma. The idea of using it as an aesthetic choice, a decoration, was so profoundly, viscerally alien that Valen's logical mind crashed like a primitive computer. Thar, the great Grolak warrior, actually took a step back, his forearms uncrossed, his posture shifting from arrogant repose to sudden, alert tension. His mandibles, which had been clicking in annoyance, were now frozen half open. He had studied war his entire life. He understood tactics, logistics, weapons theory. He understood honorable combat and the clean kill. In Grolak culture, an enemy's armor was taken as a trophy, but it was meticulously cleaned and polished. To leave the blood on it, to intentionally apply it as a decorative element, that wasn't warfare. That was monstrous. It spoke of a psychology he couldn't begin to fathom, a deep, primal savagery that made the Forlag themselves seem like well-adjusted school children. He looked at Jake, at this soft, unremarkable creature, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of something his species rarely experienced outside of combat: uncertainty. Jake just stood there, patient, as if he'd asked whether they preferred matte or gloss finish. He seemed completely unaware of the existential crisis he had just induced in two of the galaxy's most respected minds. "Just, for the records," he added, as if to be helpful. "Authenticity matters in my line of work. A ceremonial piece tells one story. A battle-worn piece tells another. The blood tells the most important part of that story, the story." Valen's orb finally managed, its voice now a strained, wavering tenor. "Yeah," Jake said, gesturing to the breastplate. "This isn't just a hunk of metal. It's a statement. A polished suit says, 'I am a proud warrior. Behold my glorious panoply.' A suit covered in the guts of your enemies says, 'I am death.'" "Run," Thar made a choking sound. He was the one who was supposed to understand this. He was the expert on primitive warfare. But this human, this fragile little primate, was discussing psychological operations on a level that was both deeply sophisticated and utterly barbaric. "This is unacceptable," Thar growled, regaining a fraction of his composure. He pointed a thick, clawed finger at the hammered breastplate. This crude shell is an insult. It cannot possibly possess the required durability. It is all surface texture and brutish form, lacking the internal integrity of a properly forged plate. To prove his point, he stomped over to a weapons locker. With a hiss of pneumatics, a panel slid open to reveal a Grolak ceremonial combat blade. It was a magnificent weapon, a meter-long sliver of hyperdense alloy with a monomolecular edge maintained by a low-level energy field. It was designed to cleave through starship plating. It was an instrument of absolute, overwhelming force. "I will demonstrate its weakness," Kthar declared, hefting the blade. He stalked toward the display stand where the breastplate sat, looking small and insignificant. The other academics in the room backed away, creating a wide circle. They knew what that blade could do. This was going to be a very short, very destructive demonstration. Jake watched him approach, his expression unchanged. He didn't seem alarmed or defensive. He just looked interested. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said, his voice calm and quiet, almost lost in the cavernous hall. Kthar scoffed. "And why not, human? Are you afraid to see your crude handiwork destroyed?" "No," Jake said simply. "I'm afraid you'll break your sword." And your arm. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the statement stunned Kthar into a moment's pause. This soft thing was telling him, a Grolak weapons master, that striking a piece of junk metal would break his arm? The absurdity was so profound it was almost funny. He let out a booming laugh that echoed through the hall. "Your species possesses a strange humor, human. Now watch." He raised the blade high, its monomolecular edge shimmering under the sterile lights. He positioned himself, channeling his immense strength into his upper right arm. This wasn't just a strike. It was a formal execution of an inferior object. With a roar that was pure Grolak battle lust, he brought the blade down in a devastating arc, aimed directly at the center of the breastplate. It did not cut. It did not dent. It did not shatter. The blade, an artifact of supreme technological achievement, met the crudely hammered, subtly angled surface of the breastplate and skidded. The sound was not the clean shink of a cut, but a horrifying, high-frequency SEE of tortured metal, like the shriek of a dying god. The monomolecular edge, designed to sever bonds, found no perpendicular surface to attack. It was deflected by the complex, layered hardness of Jake's crude forging and shunted sideways by the armor's deliberately imperfect, angled geometry. All the kinetic energy of Kthar's immense blow, with nowhere to go, did the only thing it could. It traveled back up the unyielding length of the blade. The hyperdense alloy of the sword vibrated at a catastrophic frequency. For a split second, it glowed cherry red. Then, with a crack like a thunderclap, it shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. But the energy didn't stop there. The shockwave continued its journey, racing up Kthar's arm like a bolt of lightning. The Grolak's thick, chitinous plates, evolved to withstand crushing impacts, were not designed for this kind of high-frequency, harmonic resonance. There was a series of wet, cracking sounds. Kthar let out a strangled howl of agony and shock, stumbling back and clutching his arm. The proud warrior, who had boasted of his strength just moments before, was now on his knees, his formidable limb bent at an angle chitin was never meant to hold. The hall was plunged into a silence so deep it felt like a physical pressure. The only sound was Kthar's pained gasps and the soft, metallic tinkle of the last few fragments of his legendary sword falling to the floor. Jake walked calmly over to the breastplate. It was completely unharmed, save for a long, faint silver scratch where the blade had skidded off. He ran a finger along the mark. "See," he said to the room at large. "Angled surfaces. Differential tempering. You guys were so focused on making the metal hard. You forgot to make it smart." He looked over at the whimpering Kthar. "It's a concept we figured out a few centuries ago for our ground-based combat vehicles. We call them tanks. You don't try to stop a projectile. You try to make it go somewhere else. It's less about being a wall and more about being a ramp." He tapped the breastplate. "Your forges make the metal uniformly hard. That's bad. It makes it brittle. I made the surface incredibly hard, but left the metal underneath softer, more pliable. So the surface deflects and the body absorbs what's left of the shock. It's like trying to punch a pillow that's wearing a helmet." He then walked over to the fallen Grolak, crouching down with a sigh. Let's see that arm. Cthar flinched as Jake's soft, fleshy hand gently touched his shattered limb. Yep, that's a nasty spiral fracture. Looks like the shock wave shattered the bone lattice all the way up to the elbow. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his examination efficient and professional. You're lucky. On Earth, we have this thing called baseball. Pitchers can get injuries like this just from throwing a ball too hard. The torque just tears the bone apart. Valen finally found his voice, or rather, his orb did. It was high-pitched, glitching, and full of static. Explain. Explain this. Now, your species is class 7. Fragile. Weak. You have no history of advanced metallurgy. You are prey animals. Jake paused in his examination of Cthar's arm. He looked up at the flickering, terrified Xylosian. A slow, tired smile spread across his face. It was not a bared teeth appeasement display. It was a look of profound, ancient pity. Ah, he said softly. I see the problem. You've been reading the official tourist brochure. He stood up, turning to face the assembled, speechless academics. You want an explanation? Okay, you're right. We are fragile. We are soft. We don't have claws, or chitin, or natural armor. We're not very fast. Our senses are mediocre at best. By all galactic standards, we should have been wiped out by the first moderately aggressive predator that stumbled across us. He began to pace slowly, his voice taking on the cadence of a patient teacher explaining a complex subject to a very, very slow class. The mistake you made is in your classification system. You cataloged our world, Earth, as a class 7 garden world. I've seen the files. Temperate climate, stable geology, abundant liquid water, diverse but non-hyperaggressive fauna. It's a lovely description. It's also dangerously, catastrophically wrong. Your survey drone must have landed in the one place on the planet we've managed to pave over and sanitize, a place we call a suburban park. He stopped and looked directly at Valen. Proctor, your species is crystalline. You evolved on a low-gravity world with a placid, methane atmosphere. What do you think a 1G gravity field would do to that beautiful, slender frame of yours? Valen's light flickered. The answer was obvious. It would crush him into a pile of glittering dust. The gravity on my homeworld, Jake continued, is considered a high-G environment by about 90% of the galaxy's species. We don't even notice it. Our children learn to walk in it. Our skeletons are fused, solid-state calcium lattices designed to withstand decades of constant, crushing pressure. Our hearts are ridiculously overpowered pumps designed to force blood up to our brains against that constant pull. We're not weak, Proctor. We're dense. He turned his attention to Cthar, who was now staring at him with wide, pain-filled eyes. Cthar, you're a Grolak, apex predator from a world of predators. You're big, strong, armored. Impressive. On Earth, you'd be about mid-tier. We have land predators that outweigh you by a factor of 2, with teeth like daggers and claws that could peel that chitin off you like a piece of fruit. We call them bears, and they're not even the scariest things in the woods. We have cats the size of your ground car that hunt by ambush and can snap your spine with a single bite. We have reptiles that can swallow you whole. And that's just the big stuff. Jake's voice grew more intense, more animated. He was getting into it now, the teacher in his element. You want to talk about weapons? We have snakes whose venom is a neurotoxin so complex it can shut down your entire nervous system in minutes. A single drop is enough to kill 100 Grolaks. We have spiders, tiny little 8-legged things, whose bite can cause your tissues to liquefy. We have insects that carry diseases in their saliva, microscopic agents of death that can rewrite your own cells and turn your body against itself. We call them mosquitoes. They're responsible for more human deaths than all of our wars combined. Your ship's medical bay would register them as a planetary-scale bioweapon outbreak. We call it summer. The air in the room was growing thick with terror. The academics were looking at each other, their universal translators struggling to keep up with the torrent of horrifying concepts. Venom, toxin, virus, disease. These were things they studied in sealed labs, remnants of a barbaric past. This human spoke of them as common annoyances. You think our world is safe? Jake laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. The weather can kill you. We have swirling columns of air that can tear a starship apart. We call them tornadoes. We have planet-spanning storms called hurricanes that hit with the force of atomic bombs. We have regions where the temperature drops so low your lungs will freeze solid if you breathe too deeply. We have other places where the heat will literally cook you in your own skin. Our planet's crust is broken into pieces that grind against each other, creating shockwaves that level entire cities. The ground itself is trying to kill us. We have mountains that vomit molten rock and poison gas. We call them volcanoes, and people build houses on them because the view is nice. He walked back to the workbench and picked up a rag to wipe his hands, his movements casual. Everything on Earth is in a constant state of trying to kill everything else. The plants evolved poisons and thorns to stop from being eaten. The animals evolved speed, claws, and venom to eat them anyway. And then there's us, the soft ones, the prey. He threw the rag down. So what did we do? We didn't grow armor, so we learned to make it. We didn't grow claws, so we sharpened sticks and rocks. Then we learned to sharpen metal. We're not fast, so we learned to be patient. We became the most terrifying predator the planet has ever known. We're persistence hunters. We can't outrun our prey, so we just follow it. For hours, for days, in the blistering heat. We just walk and walk and walk until the thing we're hunting, a creature 4 times faster than us, collapses from sheer exhaustion. We don't outfight our prey. We outsuffer it. He looked around the room, at the faces frozen in dawning horror. You think we're fragile? Our immune systems are a biological war zone, a constantly evolving battlefield where trillions of microscopic assassins fight a never-ending war against invaders. Most of your species would die from a common earth cold. We call it the sniffles and go to work anyway. This, he gestured to his own body, is not the product of a garden world. This is a survival machine forged in a planetary-scale crucible of death. Every single one of my ancestors, for millions of years, was smart enough, tough enough, and just plain mean enough to survive a world that was actively trying to murder them every second of every day. We are the descendants of the ones who didn't get eaten by the bears, or poisoned by the snakes, or killed by the germs, or frozen in the ice, or boiled in the desert. He finally returned to the original, horrifying question. And that brings me back to the blood. Why decorate armor with blood? Because we had to learn to fight things that were bigger, stronger, and faster than us. Brute force wasn't enough. We had to learn to fight with our brains. We had to learn psychological warfare. Fear is a weapon. And nothing inspires more primal, pants-wetting terror than seeing one of your own, a creature you thought was an apex predator, coming at you wearing the blood and entrails of your packmates as a fashion statement. He paused, letting the full weight of it sink in. It's a message. It says, I killed your brother. I am not afraid of you. In fact, I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to wear your skin as a hat. We've been doing that to each other, and to every other living thing on our planet, for so long that it's baked into our DNA. It's why we have horror movies. It's why we tell ghost stories. We're so accustomed to terror that we've made it a form of entertainment. Jake walked back over to Kthar and, with surprising efficiency, took a discarded metal strut and a roll of binding tape from a nearby toolkit. He began fashioning a crude but effective splint for the Grolak's shattered arm. You see, being underestimated is our greatest strategic advantage. Everyone looks at the soft, squishy human and thinks easy prey. They never stop to ask how a creature like that survived on a planet where the fluffy bunny rabbits have knife-like incisors and a famously bad attitude. The reconstruction hall was as silent as a tomb. The assembled academics, beings of immense intellect and power, were staring at the human as if he had just peeled back his skin to reveal a swirling vortex of pure chaos beneath. Their galaxy, which had seemed so ordered and understandable a few minutes ago, had just been turned upside down. They were not the pinnacle of evolution. They were the sheltered children of gentle worlds. The real monsters had been hiding in plain sight, filing paperwork and complaining about the quality of the coffee in the commissary. Valen's crystalline form had gone dim, its internal light a weak, frightened thrum of pale gray. The orb floated listlessly, its translator silent. The Grand Proctor was, for the first time in his long life, experiencing an emotion his people had no word for, but which humans would have instantly recognized as existential dread. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had offered him a friendly smile and asked about lunch. Kthar, his arm now secured in a splint, simply stared. The physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological shock. He was a warrior. He understood strength. But this was something else. This was a strength born of absolute, unrelenting weakness. It was a paradox that his warrior's mind couldn't resolve. He looked at Jake's soft hands, hands that had forged unbreakable armor and set his shattered bones, and he felt a primal, instinctual fear he hadn't felt since he was a hatchling. Jake finished his work, patting the splint with a sense of finality. He stood up, dusted off his hands on his trousers, and surveyed the scene. The broken sword, the terrified academics, the Grolak warrior, humbled and broken, the breastplate, sitting on its stand, no longer looking crude, but radiating a palpable sense of ancient, brutal purpose. He gave that same, mild, unassuming smile. "Right?" he said, his voice cheerful now. The lecture concluded. "My contract's fulfilled. The armor works. Now, if you'll excuse me, my next appointment is back on Earth. I'm teaching a kindergarten art class." He started walking toward the door, then paused and looked back over his shoulder at the collection of petrified geniuses. "You have to be really careful with that age group," he added, his expression turning serious again. "They're still in their biting phase.